When Arya Stark was first introduced, she was the mostly innocent yet hard-headed and tomboyish youngest daughter of the Stark family. To say that she has changed over the course of the series is a gross understatement. The Arya Stark that currently exists in the show bears almost no resemblance to the independent, rebellious, but still fundamentally good character from the early episodes. Arya is now, for lack of a better term, a cold-blooded killer. Like all of the Starks, she has suffered through tragedies and unimaginable loss, and this trauma has hardened her and transformed her in some very dark and potentially terrifying ways. Thus, it's worth asking, is Arya still on the side of good? Is Arya still a hero? In as much as the world of Game of Thrones allows for concepts like heroes, the word hero is defined as a person who is admired for their courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities, which Arya, by that definition, can no longer accurately be described. She's murdered almost relentlessly, and even when Westeros, as brutal as it is, killing with reckless abandon is still at least nominally shunned. Arya, however, does not kill with abandon and doesn't seem to take any overt joy in killing. Her victims, by and large, come from her kill list, formed after the unjust murder of her father Ned Stark, and stem from a need for justice and vengeance. Arya can now more correctly be thought of as an anti-hero, along the lines of someone like Dexter Morgan, the serial killer who only killed other serial killers, or Marvel's The Punisher, who murdered criminals in retaliation for the murder of his family by criminals. She's not quite to the level of someone like Breaking Bad's Walter White, who began a life of crime for understandable yet still not quite justifiable reasons, but continued despite having multiple opportunities to leave that criminal life. Or even Tony Soprano, who was born into a crime family and made no effort to change his ways despite caring deeply for his family and constantly put them at risk through his behavior. But it's still difficult to categorize her on the side of good and just. Arya falls into a sort of gray area now. She doesn't kill for enjoyment or out of bloodlust or for thrills. She still kills those who, on the surface at least, seem to deserve it. But at times she can almost seem sadistic in her methods. The way she went about killing Walder Frey, for instance, is a good example of this. Walder Frey was no one's definition of a good guy. No fan of the show grieved over his death, but was it absolutely necessary to kill his two sons, bake them into a pie, and feed that pie to him? That's truly horrific and cruel. Something one would expect of a real-world serial killer like Ed Gein or Jeffrey Dahmer. Even her poisoning of the entirety of the remaining male Freys seems a bit like bloodthirsty overkill. Not only is she a murderer, she's now a mass murderer. There are a few, if any, heroic characters that have committed such an act without severe comeuppance or punishment. However, in season 7, Arya still chose family over dealing out another death. She had the choice to continue to King's Landing and murder Cersei, but upon hearing that her half-brother Jon Snow was alive and at Winterfell, she chose that path instead. So perhaps not all is lost for Arya Stark. It's difficult to define Arya as either hero or villain. She's undoubtedly a savage, brutal, and slightly sadistic killer, but her murderous acts, with the lone exception of the stable boy she accidentally killed in season 1, comes from a place of love for her family, twisted and distorted by immense tragedy and suffering. Arya Stark, like most characters on Game of Thrones, can't be so sharply defined by terms like hero or villain, and that is part of what makes her so fascinating. Learn more about Arya and all of the Stark family at Game of Thrones Wiki.